You're listening to the 4-Phase Cycle podcast with your hosts, Dr. Alex and Megan of ZESTY Ginger. If you're looking to naturally balance hormones and learn how to work with your body instead of against it, you've definitely come to the right place. As a duo of an integrative MD and a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner and best friends, we use the 4 phases of the female cycle in combination with functional lab work and mindset practices to transform the lives of the women we work with.
We also have a whole lot of fun along the way. If you're new around here, it's best to start with season 1 before jumping around and plan to roll up your sleeves. Showing up for ourselves and enjoying our lives is what good health is all about. Just a quick reminder though, this information is not intended to diagnose, manage, or treat disease. Always consult with your doctor before making changes.
Hello, Zesties. Alex here. I'm back with J9. I'm really excited about today actually, because just like I was talking yesterday, we've been kind of building up to having this sort of discussion and being at the place where this discussion really had context and the framework for this, because everyone generally wants to know, what do I do in my life and how do I do it in a way that actually gets me what I want? So we've been building a lot of it, and now comes the point where we talk about what it looks like to come from that place. And there is still a deeper discussion here. There almost always is, because what we do on the surface and the actions we take are really important for the creation of what we want to be able to flow, right? The actions are the vehicle for allowing the world to mirror back to you what it is that you're asking for, right? Like, you want to be fit, you're going to have to move your body in some way. The question though, and this is where I think that's where the deeper discussion really comes in, is that a lot of us are doing the outward action at the expense of a deeper drive and the power source. And that's why I titled this Power, is because when we are kind of surface level spun up and we're just doing things because we're just doing them and we've been told to do them, there's not a lot of power behind that. And part of it gets compounded because we feel powerless when we do things and don't see the outcomes. That's where discouragement comes from, because we're like, why am I not getting what it must be me, right? I'm powerless to create what I want in the world. It is then becomes one and the same discussion of, when you take massive action that really gets at the heart of what it is you're creating, and you can simultaneously tap into the power of you behind that and really actually appreciate what you are able to do right now, knowing that in doing so you are garnering more power and really feeling into that and growing into it, then this is all that upward spiral power and the application and evidence of power in your life to do these kind of things then makes us feel like, yeah, I have evidence for it, and we feel more powerful. We take more powerful action. That's more evidence of our power. And it's not that hard to see the loop that takes us in. So we're going to talk about action, and we're talking about what does it feel and look like to really begin to use what we do as a way to interact in a more clear and guided way with our own power source, our own power creation, right? The actual ability for us to believe in ourselves and have all these things happen. We are often, and probably I would say everyone, though since I don't know everyone, that's it's not a thing, but most of us are much more powerful than we're giving ourselves credit for. But again, we don't learn this kind of thing. There's no one in kindergarten that, they're talking to you about colors, but no one's ever like, hey, you're actually a powerful being and you can create whatever you want. Like, that's not the conversation we're being told, and it's not the conversation being had. So that's why as adults a lot of times we're like, oh wow, this is a whole thing that is available to us that I haven't even really begun to explore. All right, so massive action. The way that this fits into the bigger picture is that I already talked about on day 7 the desire to create and have that outward flow of energy that we get during the cycle as things shift is often the driver of kind of setting up wonky experiences on biting off more than we can chew or taking on things that we really should say no to, and a whole bunch of stuff that generally people experience and then wonder why they're experiencing it. Saying it's not about other people. I have also had this as well. So that is why in phase 1 there was a lot of talk about clarity and about looking at the direction and the higher vision of where you're going. We got really clear. It wasn't 18 million things to fix all at the same time. The bigger vision does give us the gift of seeing the bigger picture from like that higher vantage point and seeing how the different components fit in. But as we figure out what to release and what we've outgrown, and then really tapping into our own intuition about where do I think my most aligned kind of unfolding is, right? What is it that looks like? So we talked about it in health. What would you be like? What kind of stuff would you be doing? What would you be wearing? What would you be eating? How would you be moving? What kind of stuff do you do when you wake up if you are already at the place that you wanted to be? Or we talked about an intermediate space that represented positive movement towards that direction. The reason we were doing all of that is that guidance, that's the GPS. So we've taken stock of where we are. Now we have visioned into and felt into where we are going. And then how does that get turned into a to-do list? Like, what is it that you're doing every day, right? And as we'll talk about in phase 3, there's a component of upkeeping some of the things we do every day-ish, or having, like a handful of things that we rotate through that we upkeep. So we'll get to all of that. But in phase 2, this is where we have the opportunity to really hone into this like needle move, the activities that are going to cause the biggest impact. Like, where are the leverage points in our lives that we can then take action on to catapult us to the next level? Now, you can kind of hear in that that's not something that you can sustain forever. The goal is not to take massive action every single day, the same way that Thanksgiving is great, but I don't want to have a Thanksgiving meal every day, right? So there's a time and a place for this thing, and the time and place is in phase 2 when a lot of that energy is building. And then in phase 3 we'll talk about kind of the follow-up of that and what it looks like to live that out in a way that, like, yes, you can't be in massive action all the time, but we need some component of that at times to really catapult us to that next level. And that's what's so cool about flowing with your cycle after cycle, is that you do massive action, like needle moving activities, at least, for a portion of the month, every single month. It adds up really, really quickly. It doesn't even feel like that would be the case up front when you're like looking at it, you're actually going through it. But oftentimes in retrospect, you're like, holy cow, it's just those things. Every time there's a step up, then maybe there's a plateau. Maybe it's just kind of a slant, right? You're going up upstream, you're going up the hill, everything's going, or you plateau out. It doesn't really matter actually what the fallout is, but every time you take that big step up, every time you do something like that, every time you exhibit to yourself that, yes, I will show up for this, I will do the things that I need to do to get me there, at a time when I'm really geared for it. I've grounded myself. I'm very clear on that. I know why I'm doing it. All of that stuff is in place. Consistently having periods of time where you take the massive action, it changes the game drastically, very, very quickly in the grand scheme of things. Now, if you're like me, you want it done yesterday, and that's just like a lesson that I'm learning over time. But rapidly is, when we have forward motion month after month after month like that, it feels good. It really like kind of habitualizes the fact that we can grow and we can move towards our goals. And it's actually, when we reach a goal, it feels really good, but then you get used to having that and you want the next thing. So it's not always getting the thing that you want, though that is the goal. It's actually feeling like you're moving towards the goal and you can appreciate yourself moving towards it. That also feels really good. It's actually not that different. It's only when you feel like you're not even getting there that is really super frustrating, or it's like one step forward, two steps back, and that kind of thing. Then this is really where we're going with that. So massive action, we've gotten really clear on the where we're headed. This is the time where, when we have identified goals, and you'll see this in your companion guide at zestyginger.com/flow, you already did the work to identify what is the bigger picture, where am I headed. Then from that big picture, in phase 2, during this time, we start to think in terms of, when I have my goal of X, what are going to be 1 to 3 things I can do today that move me towards that goal? So really, it's pretty simple, because the hard work is coming up with where you're going, dropping the stories around it, not doubting yourself. Like, we already did that stuff, so you're good there. Now the actual practical thing is pretty straightforward. Once you know that very clearly, generally speaking, you can start to have the couple next steps. Now, you're not going to have all of them, and that's okay, but generally speaking, you'll have some of them, and in doing so, that will give you the more information to figure out the rest. So you're not dealing with the full picture, and either I haven't gotten there or that's just not how this place works. But the steps then are like, okay, if it is my goal to eat at home more, right? Eating at home and enjoying home cooked food, and it makes me happy to cook, and that is the vision that I have, that we're all in the kitchen and the kids are in there playing, and I'm talking with my partner about my day. We're kind of recapping it, and that's our connection, and there's intimacy, and maybe I'm having a glass of wine or like kombucha and I'm enjoying that. And right, there's a million and 10 reasons why we could want something as simple as cook at home more, but what that can represent is like, this is an expression of enjoying the life I have created. And that's where the clarity in phase 1 is so helpful, is that it's not a to-do list. Oh, now I have to cook. Now I just really want to order DoorDash, right? That's a very different thing than, hey, look, by using this room that I have in my house already and the people that I have in it, I'm actually reaching a whole bunch of my goals at once in doing so. And that's just an example. Maybe that doesn't even resonate with you. Maybe it's the job example of, I really am not feeling aligned with the work that I'm doing, and it feels kind of soul sucking, and I want to create my own business, or I want to become a health coach, or whatever it is that is applicable to you. When we have how would that fit into the bigger goals and structure of our life, then we can start, for the actual daily to-do list, we bring a different vantage, we get a different vantage point to then decide what's going to be most important, right? Because when your goal is, I just want to cook at home more, but I'm really just dreading it and I don't, totally appreciate why I'm doing it, then the to-do list is going to be like, go to the store, look up the recipes, buy the food, cook the food, clean the thing, and then you're laying in bed going, well, I don't want to do that again. That sucked, right? But and I think it's helpful to use the smaller examples because I think when it gets really like serious, we make it mean a lot of stuff. Whereas like when I talk about cooking at home, more than likely you're not having a strong emotional reaction to it, and maybe you are, but it's like a smaller container. So from that, when we look at the bigger picture instead, an aligned to-do list is moving the needle forward. And again, I'm completely spitballing off the top of my head, but it's like, if I want that time to be a family connection, partner intimacy, communing with myself, getting in touch with my body, whatever it is, if those are the actual goals, what are the really powerful actions that will do that? So instead of, meal prepping alone, right? That can be my to-do list is getting everyone, together to have input. I mean, Lord, depends on what your kids are probably like and their ages and stuff. Sometimes that could be way too many inputs, but that kind of thing where it's like, how do I bring it all together? And likely it's something that you aren't already doing, and that's the massive action. Like, it could be a big new thing that is exciting for you, right? Because if there's a way to turn that time into a whole bunch of fun that everyone is like into and they've had input about, and you're really growing as that family unit and really experiencing it like that, what are the things that are going to have to go on your to-do list to make that happen? Is it something that you purchase for your kitchen that helps you? Is it like a meal, you sign up for a meal planning service that just gives you the grocery lists and the recipes, and all you have to do is go get the stuff, and now all of a sudden, okay, boom, I know exactly what I'm making, I already have a schedule, I have that kind of thing, right? It doesn't matter what the answer is. I probably can't even like think of all the things, but that is what I mean by massive action. I gave you the example last episode for us in our business, right? There was a comfort level in doing things, just Megan and I, for our business, and those things were not massive action, right? For me to, I love recording podcasts. Like, this is why I can't ever keep them short, because I get in here and I'm like, oh my gosh, this feels so good to me. I just want to share and like do this and hang out with you and all of that stuff, right? So that feels comfortable to me. But if I just sat alone in my room, made a podcast, and just put it out there and never did anything like to announce it or share it or do anything like that, that's not massive action. That's just kind of daily small steps, which, don't get me wrong, I still would have to do, because I can't reach out to make connections with other business people and share what I've created and kind of find new people to share my ideas with, which is what really moves the needle forward. If I don't have a podcast, right, I actually have to sit and record it to even share anything. But that stuff is a lot easier. Like I'm saying, that most people are doing things. That's why they're like, well, I'm doing the things. Why isn't it working? So the massive action, the to-do list really ends up being very short, because there's not 10 massive action items, generally speaking, that are available to you at any given time. There's going to be just a couple, and most of the time, you're on the right track is that you intuitively sense that, like, ooh, yeah, that would be really cool if I did that. And a lot of times, due to it being the massive action and like something new that's going to move the needle forward, there's a little bit of like, ooh, this is new territory. This is where it really helps to be listening to your body's cues and feeling grounded, because some of that, it just comes with growth. So a little bit or a moderate amount of like, ooh, wow, I have to reach out to that person, or hey, I'm gonna like set a boundary here. Sometimes it looks like the opposite where you're like, um, I'm taking massive action to say I'm no longer available for this relationship or this behavior or this way of you treating me, right? That kind of stuff. But that feels uncomfortable. That can make a huge shift. Like, let's say there's someone at work that you haven't set boundaries with, and they really, every time you come in, you're like, gosh, every time they talk to me, I get pissed. I'm like off my game. Now I'm thinking about them instead of what I need to do, right? That kind of stuff can really impact us, even though they were around for like 15 seconds, said something annoying and left. The residue of that can really impact us. And so that kind of stuff oftentimes can feel uncomfortable as we consider taking that massive action. But even if that's the only thing on your to-do list, hey, I talked to this person and set some boundaries around what I'm available for in this relationship, whatever kind of relationship it is, that could be such a massive impact on how you feel, your emotional state, your energy levels, that if that's the one massive action that you took today and even for the rest of this phase, you likely don't even know how massive that is until you actually live it out. And that's why because it ends up being a process you repeat, you can start to gauge that over time. You're like, oh yeah, that thing felt scary. And because I felt like this was true and in alignment with the bigger picture, I was then motivated to do it, right? And actually modulate my emotions around it and ground myself and remind myself that I'm safe and do those things. Then that can so drastically change, right? Like when you're in business, one connection with someone could change the outcome of your entire year. One podcast interview or one conversation with your boss or a new way of interacting with your partner, right? Setting the tone for that could have an entire avalanche effect. And so that it's not going to look like a whole bunch of things to do. You can have ancillary things, and we'll talk about that in phase 3 and kind of how to integrate that into your life. But this phase today, this is where we really think about what truly, truly changes my relationship with this, and how do I take some sort of step to move that forward. Sometimes when it's too massive, we can pull it back. So sometimes we can identify something and also identify that we're not quite in the place for it. And that's okay too. Look, the Jets are cheering us on. And then we can either shelve that, put something in its place, or we can break it down into parts. So again, there is no one way to do this. I'm never going to sit here and be like, oh, then you make a to-do list with 3 things on there and then you get after it. Like, that's not how this works. But I can give you that general framework to really say, how does this actually look like? What are my options? And then really it's an interactive thing. You will know when it feels right and you're a little appropriately like, boy, this feels like a stretch. Cool. You are on the right track, and it will let you know if you're biting off more than you can chew, because then you'll just be like, oh my God, I'm actually just terrified. And if that's the case, and that means that you need to reel it back in a little bit and approach it in a more stepwise fashion, cool, do that. Absolutely. There's no external definition of massive. Having a difficult conversation with someone to someone who doesn't know that person and doesn't know that what it means to you is probably like, yeah, I could tell that person to stop interrupting me. Like, that's so easy, right? It's only because you're you and you have that thing that makes it big. So don't let anyone else determine what massive, the definition of that or what it would look like. If it feels like that for you and it fits within the understanding that you have of the bigger picture of you and how you interact with your life, that's cool. That's exactly what it is. That's exactly what it looks like, no matter how it looks like on the surface. That's what it is. All right, my loves. This is a really, really, really big, big discussion, and this will play out over the rest of the cycle and really play out in the rest of your life. When we talk about this massive action stuff, the discussion of power, we build power in proving to ourselves that we can make these determinations. And then when we feel that little bit of fear, like, ooh, this is big, that means I'm on the right track, I'm going to do it, then it really shows us and demonstrates our power to ourselves. What I want to end the episode with is that we can, just like we can tap into creativity and groundedness on an intentional, planned out level, and then use that knowledge to apply it in our life, it's the same thing with power. So there's a concept of a power bath that Megan and I created for ourselves. I'm sure we're not the only ones to do this kind of thing, obviously, like people take baths, but this is our version of it, right? So a power bath is using a bath to really like visually and kinesthetically have the experience of, how can I represent my own power to myself in this water container? Because again, this is like, we practice with things that are very small and feel inconsequential, because that makes it a lot safer. You're like, it's hard to get a bath wrong, you know what I mean? So with that, even if you're like, what's a power? That sounds complicated. There's actually not that much to it, and that's the whole point, because if you can't get it wrong, that's the best time to practice. You're just kind of like trying it out on for size. So you're going to submerge yourself into the visual representation of what power means to you. And like, if it jives with you, that the concept of feminine power, because right, we're connecting to the flow. We're not just connecting to, like, Tony Robbins is a great example of this. He's all about massive action all the time, and he has very intense masculine energy and the capacity to do that. It doesn't matter what the gender, there are men and women who can relate to that, and that is how they work. And then also there's the flip side of it, where there's the feminine power, and that looks different than constant massive action, generally speaking. We all fall out in a whole lot of areas with that, so there's no real template, but we've downplayed feminine power for a while, and this is kind of tapping individually, bringing that back. And then as we individually bring it back, we allow other people to witness us and remember what that looks like. And then what I assume, there's some men that we've heard of, but I wouldn't be surprised if that changed over time. Even men who were like, hey, I feel good flowing with it. Now, they won't have a cycle, but that's not to say that we can't tap into that kind of stuff. So that obviously is a much bigger conversation that we don't have time to get into. And honestly, I'm not here to tell anyone what to do. But feminine power, this concept of being soft at times, being flowing at times, being powerful at times, being really, you can be dominating at times. The feminine power flow is dynamic in nature. And when we are in water and kind of focusing on, what would I need to make this bath look like that represents to me my own feminine power? So some of us lean more towards kind of like the girliness of it, and it's roses and petals and bath salts and like pink candles and hearts and whatever that is. And for some of us, it's like putting on a rain and thunder and lightning track and lighting black candles and putting black crystals in the, like, literally can be anything as long as it represents your own feminine power to you. I cannot stress enough how little it matters what it looks like, as long as it's your external representation of how you feel into your own power. And that's kind of the question, right? And And having to create a bath that looks like that, you have to first ask yourself what that would even be represented by, which then gives you some glimmer and some more information about where you're at with that currently, knowing that that can change and evolve over time depending on where we are, but also how much we step into it. So sometimes we recreate visual representations of what we've been told that looks like. There is nothing wrong with that either, because in doing that, you actually feel into like, yeah, that feels icky to me, right? If you're doing something because you've been told and it doesn't jive with you, you'll know about it. As long as you're following along here, you'll know because you're tapping into that sense. So even if you start out with something that is not totally authentic to you, in the act of doing it, you get the information that will guide you towards the next thing. And that is exactly what this whole thing is about, because you won't know your full feminine power. I can't say I fully understand mine, but I'm a heck of a lot further along than I used to be, and I'm very much excited for what that will look like in a year from now, in 10 years from now, in 40 years from now. That's going to be super fun, but it's not going to look like the way it does now. So, power bath, check it out, see what you think. And of course, as with all of this, if you're like, well, I don't want to do a bath, but I could do this instead, do that. Don't even worry about it. You get to set the tone for what this looks like for you. I'm just throwing out some ideas. All right, my loves, thank you so much for hanging out with me. I will be back. Have the best time, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks for coming out to hang with us on the podcast. It is our goal to transform the way women are treated in healthcare, and we need your help. We need your help to get the word out. We have a lofty goal of 1 million downloads, and we know that as this podcast grows, we're going to be able to reach more women, get more amazing speakers for you, and bring the most cutting-edge information.
If you found these podclasses helpful, please take a moment to text 5 women you know the link to the series. We appreciate your help so much. Can't wait to see you next time.